accessed the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Welcome to the podcast of OA, and this is a very special episode as we kick off JLMAY. This is the podcast of OA, as I've just said, and we're a Green Lantern-centric podcast. This is the show, one of the two shows you can turn into when you are interested in anything and everything to do with the Green Lantern universe. I am your co-host, Myron Rumsey, and I am joined by my good friend and co-host, Phil Bova. Phil, my friend, how's life treating you?
Spring is here. Well, I'm just waiting for the final month of our school to get out, and I get to enjoy the summer. Otherwise, I'm great. Here in St. Louis, it's going good.
Great. So this is really something a little bit different for us now. We've been rotating between talking about the current Green Lantern Grant Morrison series with Liam Sharp and doing retro reviews. So this is kind of a retro review show, but we're kicking off a big podcast crossover event that takes place throughout the entire month of May. 2019 is the 10th anniversary of Blackest Night. So the Lantern Cast has put together, as they do every year, a podcast event where they talk about something. And this year we have a number of podcasts that are partnering up together to talk about Blackest Night. So like I said, we're the kickoff show. So we're going to be talking about Green Lantern number 43 and Blackest Night number 0. And then we're going to hand it off to Chris and Reggie's Cosmic Treadmill. And then it's going to go from them to the Idlehead of Diablo. Then it's going to go to the Fire and Water podcast. Then to Head Speaks, Coffee and Comics, the Long Box Crusade, and then it's going to wrap up with the Lantern Cast. We're going to talk about the end of Blackest Night. And then there's other shows on top of that are teaming up to talk about some of the one-shots and the tie-ins. So shows like Waiting for Doom, Task Force X, Justice's First Dawn, the Starman Manhunter Adventure Hour, and I think Chad from the Lantern Cast was saying that he's got more people jumping in. So really cool. Yeah, it's really and I'm really honored that they asked us to kick it off. So I'm very humbled by that, and I'm going to post links to the shows that I'm aware of in our show notes so that people can easily find these other shows to follow up. Because if you're listening to this, if you're tuning into this because you normally don't listen to our show, I want you to be able to find all of the other people that are partnering with us. And if you're a longtime listener, I hope you take a chance to listen to the rest of the Blackest Night coverage, because I think it's really special. I think it's great. It showcases what's great about comic book fandom when we all team up together.
It really does. And all the guys and girls, they're great people. I listen to a lot of the other podcasts on here. Coffee and Comics I'm not too much familiar with, but I'm glad that that they decided to be on here, because I would like to get involved in listening to that one. But it's just a great group of people, and we're covering something that has become a quintessential event in the DC universe.
Absolutely. So before we start talking about the books, let's talk about how did we get to Blackest Night? And this goes all the way back to 1981. There was a book called The Tales of the Green Lantern Corps. And we actually talked about it in a retro review, one of our episodes, and it introduced Nekron. And this was a miniseries that was a story that was inspired by Mike W. Barr, written by Len Wein, and drawn by legendary Joe Staton, and introduced Nekron. And then you flash forward a few years, and there were, Tales of the Green Lantern Corps was a backup feature in the Green Lantern series for a while, and they actually got an annual for Tales of the Green Lantern Corps. And in the second edition of the annual for that book in 1986, there was a small little 12-page story written by Alan Moore called Tigers. And what it tried to do is explain how Abin Sur came to die, and why was he flying a ship, and what led to his death. And he told this really neat story about the 5 inversions and them kind of seducing Abin Sur and making him think that his ring was going to fail him. And as they're recounting things to Abin Sur, they talk about a prophecy called the Blackest Night. You flash forward to 2004, and Jeff Johns comes to DC. He and Peter Tomasi are reviving the legendary Green Lantern mythos for DC Comics, bringing back Hal Jordan, bringing back the core, the whole things which we've all come to know now as one of probably the golden era of Green Lantern, most successful commercially and critically in terms of Green Lantern history. And he basically approaches this as, I've got three big stories to tell. And the first one is Green Lantern Rebirth, where he does bring back Hal Jordan and brings back the Green Lantern Corps. And then he sets up the next story, which, if you liken this to Star Wars, it goes to the Empire Strikes Back version of the next version of the story. And you flash forward to 2006, and he tells this intimate yet epic scale story in the Sinestro Corps War. And in that, he basically, for 6 months, the Green Lantern and the Green Lantern Corps book, they do nothing but talk about the Sinestro Corps War. It's a huge event, but it's confined to the two titles, which is something different for DC. This wasn't a company-wide crossover, but boy, was it extremely popular, and it really drew people to the Green Lantern mythology. And at the end of that book, they kind of talk about, well, if you liked Rebirth and you liked Sinestro Corps War, wait till you see what we have next. And there was a little teaser for Blackest Night, and we didn't know what it was. As you go from 2006 to 2009, Green Lantern exploded in popularity. And during this time, Jeff Johns starts introducing new elements like orange lanterns and basically the emotional spectrum as we come to know it now. But he starts introducing these elements, and people really responded and reacted to it in a very big way. So you started seeing collectibles around these other new characters like Larfleeze and St. Walker and so on. The Indigo Tribe and Atrocitus and the Red Lanterns, and they get kind of their own little introduction in the books, and they build up to Blackest Night. And that's where we are now when we get to Green Lantern number 43. So Phil, what do you recall of that era, that whole lead up to things?
Oh man, that was all big stuff, man. I mean, like the Sinestro Corps War was like, I liked Rebirth, don't get me wrong. I mean, Rebirth is pretty much, everybody always puts Rebirth in there when they talk about where should I jump on when it comes to Hal Jordan or when it comes to the Green Lantern. But like Sinestro Corps War, for me, it kind of that's where the expansion happened. I started seeing elements like, okay, this is bigger than just the Green Lantern Corps, because even though when the Green Lantern titles, you still had stuff going on with Sinestro and everything, it made things a lot bigger on the scale, so to speak. So I remember just picking up all those titles. Because keep in mind, this is when I started getting back involved in reading my comics and stuff. So, and when it came to like after the Sinestro Corps War ended, and when it came to that tease you were talking about, there wasn't a lot of the social hubbub that there is now, right? You didn't get on Twitter and you didn't get on your face. You probably had Facebook then, but you didn't get on there, and there wasn't this whole social networking of the comic book culture like we know today. I mean, it's completely different from what it was then. And so I remember not hearing a lot about it unless you went and bought the comic books and unless you went to the comic book shops and people were talking about it. So it was kind of like this mysterious event that was coming up. There wasn't any spoilers, like people do today. Nobody gave away anything or nobody gave anything up. And sure, there was speculation, but there was nothing like the hardcore fandom we know that just really, really grinds it into the dust. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is a different day and age now than it was then. And, it was interesting because you started seeing T-shirts for all the Green Lantern Corps characters, and not the characters, but the Green Lantern Corps, but you started seeing Red Lantern Corps T-shirts and Indigo Tribe T-shirts, and they each kind of got their own little following. And so you saw people jumping on the Green Lantern bandwagon. And one of the things that Jeff Johns did so well from crafting the story standpoint is that he put elements in, he basically built it up in a very logical fashion so that when you got to Blackest Night, if you'd been on the journey from the beginning of his run, it was so rewarding because it tied into things. There are things in this story that tie all the way back to Green Lantern Rebirth.
Yeah, there really is. And it's kind of fun because like, whenever we first started talking about doing this Blackest Night for the JLMAY event, it was all the other podcasts involved. I was like, okay, good. This is good for me to go back and reread Blackest Night because I haven't went back and revisited it in quite a long time.
Yeah. I haven't reread it a whole lot myself, just because I'm so tied up on all the new stuff. And when we do retro reviews, we try to go back before the Johns era. So this was really a treat to go back and revisit some of this stuff. So, let's take a quick pause. We're going to, in between this segment and talking about Green Lantern number 43, I'm going to play a promo that Chad Bolkelman over at the Lanterncast did for JLMAY. So it's about 3 minutes long, but I hope it gets people hyped up for what we're about to do.
That's very cool.
John Jones of Mars. Katmatui of Gorgar. Ronnie Raymond of Earth. Al Pratt of Earth. Jenny Lynn Naden. Arthur Curry. Carter Hall. Kendra Saunders. Ted Gord. Arani Desai. Paco Ramon. Hank Haywood. David Knight, Erwin Bowen, Wesley Dodds, Charles McNider, Terry Sloan, Tara Markov.
"10 years ago, a crashing wave of light erupted across the DC universe. A multicolored spectrum of energy bathed the cosmos in a war of light. Rage clashed against passion. Hope sought to stifle fear. Greed to choke out compassion. And in the middle of it all, the will to keep going and fight for all. Now this war has come to the surface of our planet, because while the light fights, the darkness rises." Hero, villain, friend, foe, family. Across the universe, the dead have risen, and it's going to take every available podcaster to fight back. In 2016, we covered the dawn of the Justice League with Justice League Year 1. In 2017, we soaked in the seminal Justice. Last year, we threw it back to the Silver Age. But this year's JLMAY podcast event covers an event that knows not the boundaries of death itself. JLMAY covers Blackest Night in celebration of the event's 10-year anniversary. Our coverage begins on April 30th with the podcast of Oa and proceeds through the entire month of May with Chris and Reggie's Cosmic Treadmill, the Idlehead of Diablo, the Fire and Water podcast, Head Speaks, Coffee and Comics podcast, Longbox Crusade, Waiting for Doom, Task Force X, the Starman Manhunter Adventure Hour, the Dr. DC podcast, the Birds of Prey podcast, Justice's First Dawn, and ends with the Lanterncast. So join us this May, because across the DC universe, the dead have risen. Where will you be?
And welcome back, everybody. So let's kick off JLMAY by talking about Green Lantern number 43. So what do you need to know before you read this book? Well, I mean, Black Hand has been around for a while. He was a kind of a lesser villain in the classic Green Lantern days, but when Jeff Johns did Green Lantern Rebirth, he spent some time building Black Hand back up again. So, we saw Black Hand actually during Green Lantern Rebirth. He lost his hand at that point. In a number of issues later, he was abducted by aliens and he was given a hand that was restructured, but it could absorb life. To keep him alive, he would have to kill other things. And you lead up to this issue, which is essentially a origin story of sorts for Black Hand in this new era of Green Lantern. So you get, very little about Green Lantern in this book. I mean, it starts out with Scar, and Scar is a guardian of the universe who was tainted by the Anti-Monitor during the Sinestro Corps War. So again, that goes back to 2007, a couple years before this book came out in 2009. And it talks about things from the perspective of Scar, and then it dovetails into talking about Black Hand. And it starts out, this is probably one of the most macabre Green Lantern issues in the history of Green Lantern there is, because it really is.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. It's very, very much of a macabre tale. I mean, it opens up after hearing Scar's thing. It opens up with Black Hand in a grave, cuddling up to some skeletons.
It's so dark, and the irony in this is Black Hand, and Cyborg Superman are two of my favorite villains in the entire DC universe.
Oh, and this was great for both of them. This was good.
I loved it, and I loved Doug Mankey's pencils. I mean, the art is beautiful.
Well, I'm glad you bring that up because, in Sinestro Corps War and Green Lantern Rebirth, it was pretty much Jeff Johns and Ethan Van Sciver. For Blackest Night, it's all about Doug Mankey and Ivan Reis.
Oh, and it's beautiful. And Ivan Reis, he's been around a while, and he's still putting out amazing stuff. But they really nailed it on this issue. I mean, it looks fantastic.
It does, and it's interesting because Jeff Johns has this really interesting philosophy about, if in order for the heroes to shine bright, they have to really shine bright in the darkest corners of the universe. And so they take Black Hand, and boy, does he go dark with this. You start out with Black Hand as a child, and you see even back then there's something wrong with him in that he finds beauty in corpses. And you see, he doesn't really get along with his family. He wants raw food because it's overcooked. Anything
he kills
cooked
his
is
family dog. Don't forget about that.
Oh my gosh, yes. He takes the family dog, Marbles, I think was the name of the dog.
Yeah.
And they can't find Marbles, and he's basically stuffed him and he's in his bedroom, and so of course he's seeing a psychologist, and there's little snippets. There's a snippet where he's helping his father, who's a mortician, with the family business, and they're in the cemetery, and he points over there and he goes, "I want that one." And his father says, "Well, what do you mean, son?" And he says, "Well, that's where I want my grave." What
so
kid?
Dark.
Yeah, what kid? I mean, he must be maybe 10 or 12 at this point.
Yeah, he's a young guy.
And he goes, he talks about, they send him to a bunch of different psychologists, and he learns to say what they want to hear instead of what he really wants to say, just to kind of get through it. But you can see as he grows up, he almost, I don't want to say he's emotionless, but you don't see him emoting. There's no empathy there whatsoever. He's considered the black sheep of the Hand family. So when he encounters Atrocitus, and again, Jeff Johns retold Hal Jordan's origin, and they brought Atrocitus into it. And so Black Hand, when he's still just William Hand, encounters a fight in a cemetery between Hal Jordan and Atrocitus and Sinestro when Hal is just a rookie. And what happens is the divining rod, the cosmic divining rod that Atrocitus has, Black Hand gets. And so he decides that, he can't stand how bright the Green Lantern light is, and he needs to shut the light off. He can't get the vision of Green Lantern out of his mind. And so he makes his costume out of a body bag. I mean,
classic.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, back in the day, Black Hand was kind of a joke.
He really was. And that's what's cool about him in this one, is because he's totally reinvented to be like this extreme, hardcore, dark villain. But I mean, he had a tragic past, and it fits the role of this Blackest Night event so well.
Well, and what he does with him, I mean, it basically gives you a little bit of a retelling. So if you didn't jump into Green Lantern during Green Lantern Rebirth, he gives you all what you need to know, all the background history in this issue of Black Hand, to give you everything you need to know to jump forward. And it even encompasses different parts of DC history. So you've got Black Hand saying, I can see death all around me. And you see little panels that talks about different characters that are important, not just because they're DC DC characters who've been killed off over the years. I mean, people like Sue Dibney and Ronnie Raymond and Ted Cord and John Johns and Gene Loring and Ralph Dibney and all those guys, Jenny Lynn Hayden, Arthur Curry. Yeah, I mean, they're all dead because DC got into a really dark place. And so Jeff John kind of recounts that. And for the reader, it reminds us of how dark the DC universe has gotten it up to this point. But then these characters are also very critical going forward. This was a book, unlike Sinestro Corps War, that was kind of a mini event inside of 2 books. This exploded across the DC universe in the summer of 2009, and it was everywhere. Every corner of the DC universe got really dark with Blackest Night. And I don't mean dark tonally, but I mean dark in terms of Blackest Night was everywhere. It was in every book. It touched pretty much every corner of the DC universe.
I want to say that it's if my number count's right, it's 76 or 77 total issues of all DC comic books encompassing the Blackest Night event. And I think that that includes all its tie-ins, but I don't think that includes a couple of the sub-issues like the Sullivan Grundy issue, and there's a couple other tales of the Blackest Night or something like that.
Yeah, there were a lot. And what was really cool about it was you didn't have to buy them all. But if you bought the ones, if you were reading Teen Titans, there was a brilliant Teen Titans miniseries that tied into Blackest Night. But you didn't have to get that to get the Blackest Night experience. All you really had to get was the Blackest Night books. If you wanted a little bit better experience, you should have bought the Green Lantern books that go along with it, because the Green Lantern books and the Green Lantern Corps books fleshed out things that took place in between the issues of Blackest Night. But it was still somewhat self-contained, and that was what I thought was so brilliant. Is it was self-contained, yet you could, if you bought it all, like some people, like I did.
I bought them all.
Yeah,
I had to have them all.
If you bought them all, boy, you got such a rich experience because you got to read how it touched every place in the DC universe.
Yeah, it was cool, and as a reader, and Blackest Night was pretty much what got me hooked back into comics completely. I mean, Sinestro Corps War and Green Lantern Rebirth, I read those haphazardly, but when I went and got all the Blackest Night stuff, I was like, okay, I'm in. I'm getting back into comics. This is where I need to start. I need to start reading again. And I'm going to tell you guys, if nobody has read Blackest Night, I strongly encourage you to get all of the issues, because it's really fun to see what happens in all the other stuff, like you said, Teen Titans and like Wonder Woman and all that. There's just some great issues out there.
If you haven't read Blackest Night and you're looking to pick up at least the main books, I would highly recommend, if you can find it inexpensively, and if you can find it in a way that fits into your budget, pick up the absolute Blackest Night, because it has all the books in chronological order of the main story, and it's presented in an oversized presentation. And boy, does the art pop! And there's some really good goodies in the back that you don't get in any of the other collected editions. But it's out there in a couple different ways. It's out there in hardcover. I think it's out there in trade paperback and maybe multiple volumes. It's in the Jeff Johns omnibuses, or should I be saying omnibuy? But it's definitely well worth the read. And some people would say, and I kind of agree to some point, that this is the peak of the Jeff Johns Green Lantern run. After this, without a core idea, no pun intended, without a core idea of where he was going to go next after his third story, it kind of wandered from event to event, but it never had the same pow that this does.
That's why everybody always goes back to Blackest Night. I mean, it's still talked about a lot. You still hear a lot of people talk about it. I mean, they rate it really high when it comes to in terms of encompassing events,
Yeah, and this was just as important to talk about the characters that were killed, because they become central characters to Blackest Night. But then there's another page that talks about characters who died and came back, because they also have very important roles to play, because there's something about them that actually helps trigger Blackest Night. Mm-hmm. And in a way, Barry Allen, who was the start of the Silver Age for DC Comics and comic books in general, Barry Allen is kind of the spark, if you will, that leads to Blackest Night, because he's kind of like the last straw for Nekron. Nekron, who is the Lord of the Dead, he's not too happy with these characters who have died and come back to life. They've cheated death. So not only is Nekron looking to extinguish the light, and so is Black Hand, but they're tired of people cheating death, and they want those people back. Which is
the premise of where the storyline goes, but it gets much deeper than that.
Absolutely. It's just, this is a masterclass in storytelling as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
and
perfectly agree.
And to get back to how dark it is, when Black Hand finally he's listening to the voice of Nekron, who's been kind of awakened a little bit, and he's on a mission. He goes back to his family home, and he got along with his father because of the family business, but the rest of the family and he are rather estranged, and because of his life as a villain, they really don't want a whole lot to do with him. But he comes to the house, and he not only kills his family, he destroys his family.
Yeah, he wipes them out. It's such a dark issue. It really is just a dark issue. But like you said, man, you got to start at that point. I mean, that's your starting point. I mean, you got to get. It's always darkest before the dawn, and this is it right here. It's so cool.
Just to turn a phrase, you have to have the blackest night before the brightest day.
There you go. There it is.
In more ways than one, if you know the history of the books. But I mean, he literally destroys his family in a very grisly manner using the cosmic divining rod. And then in what I have to say is one of the darkest panels I think I have ever seen in the 40 plus years I've been reading comics. Black Hand sits down at the dinner table with the decimated corpses of his family around him, and he sits there very just nonchalantly, unemotionally, takes the cosmic divining rod, and in a full page spread has held it up to the side of his own head and pulled the trigger. And you see him staring at the camera, at the reader. He's staring at us as he blows his brains out.
It's a great image. It's a great image. It is super cool. Very macabre, and he falls over dead, obviously. And Scar shows up, and he says, Nekron is happy. This pleases him. And Scar does what Scar is famous for doing throughout Blackest Night, and that's throwing up this black viscous liquid that has Black Lantern rings in it. And the first Black Lantern ring goes to William Hand, who becomes the herald of the Black Incarnate for the Black Lanterns. And he is like, for Green Lanterns, Ion was kind of the, the entity that was inside the power battery, and Parallax was the entity for evil, and Predator was the Predator creature was the entity for the Star Sapphires. And they kind of all have, there's the Butcher for the Red Lanterns and so on, Ophidian for the Orange Lanterns. And for the Black Lanterns, it's Black Hand, and his brain doesn't necessarily reheal, but he is brought back to unlife, for lack of a better phrase. For lack of a better, that's about what it is. Hey, did you notice the Black Lantern crest? That's his. I think that's his family crest from the funeral home.
Yes. So the Black Hand logo, the little triangle with the little 5 dots above it that represent fingers, is actually the logo from the Hand mortuary.
Mortuary, yeah.
Yep. And then he makes a play on it. He says, I'm Black Hand because he's the black sheep of the family, and his last name is Hand. And so it was kind of a play on this situation.
And he lost his hand.
Yeah, and he lost his hand. And then it ends with him looking back at the reader again. And he obviously looks much more macabre because he's a reanimated corpse. And he just says, with this power, I'm going to finally extinguish the light.
Which has to be, and I haven't seen this yet, would be one of the coolest cosplay outfits if you could do it.
Yeah, I've seen people do Black Hand, but not as dark as this with the corpse like makeup. I'm sure somebody could do it. I'd love to see the contact lenses they would come up with, because his eyes are black with white pupils.
Yeah, they're trippy. They look like little, I don't know what they look like. I guess they're like white veins with black mucus. But it'd be an awesome cosplay. I would do it in a heartbeat if I could.
Yeah, me too. If I was about 20 years younger, I could probably pull it off. and visually,
you're right. You're right.
Visually, you'll find throughout this series as you go on that the Black Lanterns use a play on black and silver. And so it plays into Black Hand's outfit, and it becomes this black and silver outfit. And it really sets the tone visually for a very muted palette. When you look at the Green Lantern books and the introduction of all the different, as people like to call it, the Rainbow Corps or the Skittle Squadron, when you get all the different colors together, it's a very bright book. And so tonally, this really shifts it so that when you start seeing the Black Lantern show up, it's such a great visual contrast.
It really is.
So great. It's a great start. It's basically a prelude. So this isn't Blackest Night number 0. It isn't the start of Blackest Night, but this is really the prelude. This is really kind of the teaser trailer, if you will.
And a good origin story for Black Hand.
Absolutely. He really needed a retelling, and tying it to Blackest Night, then that was the right time to do it. People talked about, well, why did we do Secret Origin in the middle of Jeff Johns' run? And the reason why was because he wanted to tie Atrocitus to that origin story, and because Atrocitus hadn't been revealed yet, he didn't want to do it right after Rebirth. It didn't make sense from a narrative standpoint. So he does it via a flashback, which was great,
and oddly enough, when Johns wrote Black Hand back during this Blackest Night event, I mean, I always recollect Black Hand being, he was a great character. He was deep, he was hardcore and everything. But the thing of it is, like, when he's been written after Blackest Night, he's been like a buffoon. You know what I mean? Like a joke, like the blunt of the joke, or I guess you could say. He didn't have that same kind of harshness he did back in Blackest Night as he did in previous runs.
Yeah, I think writers wanted to use him because of how successful the character was used in the beginning of the Johns run. And I don't think anybody, and all credit to Robert Venditti. I liked his writing for the most part during his tenure, but I don't think he was able to get it right either. I don't think anybody was. It's just I think
it was the tone of the character.
Yeah, I liken it to Larfleeze. People write Larfleeze, and Jeff Johns wrote it, so there was humor there, but it was a natural humor. It was the juxtaposition of somebody who's so greedy thrown against Christmas as an example, the Larfleeze Christmas special, where Larfleeze discovers there's a Santa Claus, and of course, that's like for Larfleeze, who wants everything, he's making his list. He thinks Santa Claus is real because he doesn't know any different. That's not...
That was a great issue. I love that issue.
It's not buffoonery, though. When they did a Larfleeze book, they tried to give him his own comic. It was fart jokes, and it's not the same thing.
No, it's not. You're totally right, and you're right. That's how they did it. They tried to expand on them, which I guess you can credit to them that at least it's an attempt. But sadly, a lot of writers don't pick up on the same tone of the characters the one before them. Look at Grant Morrison and Robert Venditti. The tone of the character is considerably different, even in the writing, even though the characterization is still there. You still know it's Hal Jordan.
Right. They find different ways they find different qualities of the same voice.
Right.
But sometimes you have writers that they take it in such a completely different direction that the character is virtually unrecognizable except for their visual representations.
Yeah, it happens a lot. If you attach yourself to certain characters, you see it happens a lot. I see it happen a lot with the Flash.
Very much so. So, Phil, let's take a break. And when we get back, we're going to talk about the Free Comic Book Day book that came out that summer, Blackest Night number 0.
Sounds great.
Feels good.
Hello, sweetie.
My name is Aaron Moss, a.k.a. Head. I love Star Wars, comic books, movies, reading, comedy, and most things geeky. Come join me monthly, well, mostly monthly, as I talk about the things I like and a few of the things I hate. Where, you may ask? Why, I'm at Head Speaks. I can be found on iTunes under Head Speaks, and at my website at headspeaks.com, and then click on Headcasts. Also, you can find me on Facebook and Google+, both under Head Speaks. Come, take a listen. This podcast is not endorsed or affiliated by Kid and Play. Though, that would be cool, huh? I'll go ahead and let Kid and Play finish the promo out.
Hey guys, welcome back. Here we are, JLMAY. Just got off Green Lantern issue number 43. Now we're jumping on to Free Comic Book Day, Blackest Night, 0 issue. Jeff Johns and Ivan Rice and Doug Mankey. Great issue. First off, I got to say, Myron, thanks for leading us off with number 43, which was a quintessential issue of the Blackest Night trilogy, or the Blackest Night event, I must say.
Absolutely.
So jumping into issue number 0, of course, we start off in pretty much where the last one left off. It's back. Is that the same cemetery? Or is that a different cemetery?
It's the same cemetery. Yep. That's
what I thought. So it's at the gravesite of Batman and Martha and Bruce Wayne, or Martha and Thomas Wayne. Sorry. And then it starts off with a narrative of Hal Jordan. So he kind of basically is I guess you could say he's kind of given a narrative of all the fallen heroes, especially Batman. So they're missing Batman at this point. Now, going back, I'm not sure. I don't remember what issue Batman was killed with the Omega beams. Do you remember when that was?
That was during Final Crisis, which was ironically written by Grant Morrison.
Okay. See, I was familiar with it, but I didn't know exactly when that took place. So they're mourning the loss of Batman, and the interesting part of this issue that I liked was the relationship between Barry Allen and Hal Jordan. One that I miss considerably, because those two haven't been together and as a friendship status for what seems like a long time.
Well, yeah, I mean, you had Barry obviously died during Crisis on Infinite Earths, and this book takes place not long after Flash Rebirth. So Barry Allen has just returned to the DC Universe not long ago, and he doesn't realize everything that has changed since he died.
Right, and he's part of that change as well.
Absolutely. And Hal is kind of giving him a backstory of here's what you missed. This is how dark the universe has gotten since you were gone. And they even contrast Barry's death, where he was praised as a saint, and Hal was treated as a sinner because of what happened during Emerald Twilight.
Which is really kind of sad, you come to think about it, when they started talking about how his tomb was desecrated, and it even says not by enemies, but by my old allies. It's like, man, poor Hal.
Yeah. He just, it was an interesting funeral issue. When they did the funeral of Hal Jordan. But yeah, his, according to this, his gravesite was desecrated by not his old enemies, but all of his old friends, which is kind of, like you said, it's a sad thing.
It really is. So we go on to more narrative, and we talk about the other fallen heroes. He talks about Arthur Curry and how he died. Then we step into Martian Manhunter and how he died. And of course, he's buried on Mars. So it's this whole, like you had said, it's this whole getting acclimated to what this universe has become and what this darkness has represented, and what they need to do to fight back. It's kind of where I got with these two characters talking.
Absolutely. And what was brilliant about this is, again, this was a free comic book day. So this book was available free to people at their local comic shops. And so for some of them who are picking this book up blindly because maybe they're not a regular DC Comics reader, or they're not reading Green Lantern, the role of the new reader is played by Barry Allen. So as Hal is giving this information to Barry, it's also informing the reader as to here's what's gone on, here's what's important building up to this story.
Right. So it's like fresh eyes. It's a fresh take.
Yeah.
It's kind of neat because people can juxtapose themselves to be in the Flash's eyes, Barry Allen's eyes, hearing the story for the first time. So it actually is a really, really good jumping on point for any avid reader. Okay. So then we go into the gravesite again, and then of course, we see, here comes Mr. Blackhand himself, and he's starting his rise. Now, the thing I like the most about this issue, the cover of it showed all the colors of the spectrum, right? And then, of course, on the left and the right, you got the darkness behind it. So it kind of introduces the readers towards the Roy G. Biv, right? Or what did you call him? The Skittle Squad?
Yeah. Well, and what's smart is that Jeff Johns makes it easily relatable to people, because he actually refers to Roy G. Biv in this book.
Yeah.
So it makes it easily relatable for the person who's new.
And I think every kid out there, I don't know about nowadays kids, but I remember Roy G. Biv all the time, still vividly to this day. And it was like one of those things that was ingrained in you as a child back when I was growing up. So you always remember where the spectrum, how the spectrum worked, you know. And Roy G. Biv, when they started talking about, you know, Blackest Night, and they started talking about the emotional spectrum, the first thing I thought about, oh, Roy G. Biv, of course, that makes perfect sense, you know.
Well, that was one of those, you know, it was one of those facepalm moments when you realized what Jeff Johns was doing, and you're like, oh my word, you know, the Green Lantern's been around this long, and nobody else thought of this until now.
That's exactly how I felt, and still to this day, you're thinking about it, you're like, man, at that time, that would have been revolutionary writing. I mean, it's like mind blowing to think about the stuff that they do now. I mean, I don't know, Heroes in Crisis and Doomsday Clock and all these other big events and stuff. But this one like took a single universe and expanded on it considerably. I mean, like introduced all these different Lantern Corps, you know. I mean, introduced all these nuanced characters that really, really expanded upon the Green Lantern mythos.
Absolutely. And then you get, you know, the Black Lantern oath in this one. You know, the blackest night falls from the skies, the darkness grows as all light dies. We crave your hearts and your demise. By my black hand, the dead shall rise. And he does the most macabre thing. He pulls Bruce Wayne's skull up from his grave, and he's going to use that to dispense Black Lantern rings.
And not only is that cool, on the skull itself, it's kind of cool how the bat ears are on there from that whatever glow effect he's got going on.
Yeah, there's like these wisps of stuff coming up at the corners that look like Batman's cowl ears.
So it's kind of neat that Black Hand knows Bruce Wayne is Batman.
Yeah, and there's even some more foreshadowing here, because you see the grave of Sue Dibney, and you know, who died during Identity Crisis, and you see the Hawks and Adam, which is you're going to see in Blackest Night #1, and you see the gravestone marker for Ronnie Raymond.
Yeah, it's all kinds of and then of course at the very end you see Scar with his evil, vindictive self.
Yeah, and then what I thought was so cool about this issue, because it was a Free Comic Book Day issue, and DC and Jeff Johns wanting this to be accessible. You know, there's a one-page thing where he talks about the story and what he wants to do and what his ambition is for the story. But what I don't see in the collected editions that's in this Free Comic Book Day book is in the back of it, there was highlights and synopsis of each core in the emotional spectrum. So it showed you, you know, there was artwork that showed you the different characters, and it told you for each one of them what emotion is tied to it, what is their home world or where's their base of operations, a brief history, what their powers are, what their weaknesses are, and then the characters themselves are labeled. So when you see the Green Lantern Corps, you know, there's little things telling you this is Kilowog, this is Guy Gardner, this is Sodom Yacht, and so on. And it does that for each one of the colors of the spectrum, which I thought was so incredibly smart, because again, this is a book that was given out to people who may not have been reading Green Lantern, and if they read this one issue, they now know everything they need to know to enjoy Blackest Night.
Right. So, I mean, it's just like a whole setup for the whole event, you know?
Yeah. And it costs them nothing. So,
right.
What brilliant marketing, right? You know?
No, it was a good jumping point at that time. And, you know, Free Comic Book Day, I mean, it's gaining more and more popular, I mean, over the years. I remember going back. I don't remember going back and getting it at this time during Free Comic Book Day. But I remember back then when they had Free Comic Book Day, it wasn't as big as it is now. It just seems like back then there wasn't long lines waiting to get in. And I've seen long lines waiting to get in on Free Comic Book Day these days. So I don't know. To me, it feels like this could have been a big one for that time frame that could have kicked off a Free Comic Book Day, like made it grow up or get blown up.
Yeah, this was definitely a big event back then. And I'll be honest, I think Free Comic Book Day has gotten bigger, but I don't think DC has put out a book as ambitious as this that had as much importance and value to the reader as this. A lot of it's been reprints.
Yeah, I totally agree. You're right. You're totally right. I haven't seen anything DC related that's been relevant, you know, not to this magnitude anyway.
No. I mean, when you look at the fact that this was a big summer crossover, and here, you know, you're in May and you're giving away this issue to potentially tens of thousands of people who are going to read this book for free, and they're going to read this story and say, oh my gosh, Batman's dead, and this is what's going on, and oh my word, you know, this is really cool and grim. And you remember, this is about the time when, you know, The Walking Dead was really taking off too. So you had people that were really hungry for stories like this that were a little, I don't want to say darker in tone, but darker in terms of horror and things. And this was basically a horror universe, a horror story in the DC universe. You know, for all the talk of Marvel zombies, I think this did it much, much better.
I would totally agree. Totally agree. It was cool. And I'm not even big into zombie stuff. I mean, I like it. It's okay. But like World War Z and movies like that kind of freaked me out a little bit.
But yeah, this was such a big event. You know, back then, like I said, you had people wearing the shirts and so on. This event, the popularity of this event, the most popular as Green Lantern got in 2009, that's what led to the movie. That's what led to the animated series. This was what brought Green Lantern to the eyes of Warner Brothers. I mean, people paid attention to it. Yeah, I would totally agree. And it's still talked about this day to where they should do like an animated feature out of it or something. I mean, I don't know. Somebody made a comment on Twitter the other day about it, and I was like, I'd be happy with a couple hour animated film out of it. I'm just surprised nothing's been done with it. But I guess comparing it to the comic book version, I mean, it's kind of hard to do. I mean, adaptation, I don't know. I mean, they can do it and they can do it well. I mean, heck, even with Green Lantern the animated series, they could have easily done it, and we had talked about that before. But it's just sad that they haven't yet. It should be in a different format, and it's a well-deserved story to be there. I agree. I mean, Green Lantern the animated series, they were actually going to go towards doing Blackest Night. They actually had the Book of the Black in Scar's office area, but yeah, it never unfortunately got to a second season. I think where this would shine, as much as I would love to see a live action version of this, I think for this to connect to people that are moviegoers, they don't know the history. And I think what makes the Black Lanterns resonate with readers is that unlike a zombie, which is kind of a brainless creature, when the Black Lanterns are revived, they have the memories of the person whose body they are. So when Ralph and Sue Dibney come back in Blackest Night #1 and they interact with the Hawks, they remember all of their history. And what they are trying to do is cause emotion to well up in the heroes that they kill, because they're harvesting the emotional energy. So they're trying to get an emotional reaction from them. And that's really more sinister than just The Walking Dead. It really is. It's like an emotional tether, and it pulls at you because, I mean, it happened a lot through a lot of the titles in Blackest Night. Right. I think what I would love to see if I were king of the forest, I would do a Sinestro Corps War animated film, and then I would do a Blackest Night one, and I would not worry about the rating. I would go for an R rating in a Blackest Night rated animated film. That'd be cool. I'd be totally down with that. I mean, Batman can get away with it in some of his stuff. Why can't Green Lantern? Right. I think if you try to do this as a PG or a PG-13, you lose the shock factor, because there are moments that when you guys listen to the Chris and Reggie's Cosmic Treadmill, and they talk about Blackest Night #1, there are moments in that book which would lose all impact if this was a PG-13 kind of a book. What if you noticed, like some of the other the DC animated features that have come out lately, have been kind of dark. Even Doomsday was kind of dark for that matter. I mean, I remember the fight between him and Doomsday was rough. My dream would be to be able to see a Blackest Night animated film in the movie theater at a Fathom event like they did with The Killing Joke. Oh, that would be awesome. That would be completely cool. I would easily drop $30 to see that. I would too. And we're not getting any younger, man. They need to get on board with this and get this made quick. You're right. I'm going to be 55 this fall, and I'm not getting any younger. So Warner Brothers in DC, if you're listening, which you're not, but if you were listening, heed my plea. Right. Get in touch, please, because we need to make this happen. I beseech you, please. Hear my plea. So that wraps up our conversation about Blackest Night #0. I hope that those of you who maybe are tuning into our show for the first time, you've enjoyed the conversation. And this is the kind of dialogue that Phil and I have in every episode when we're talking about books. So if you're new to the show, I hope you stick around. If you're a longtime listener to the show, I hope you enjoyed our coverage of Blackest Night. We're going to stop here and we're going to come back because we've got some listener feedback on previous episodes to talk about. So I hope you stick around.
All right, we'll be back in a second.
To tell you the story of Green Lantern is to tell you the story of the birth of a universe, the origins of DC as a whole.
It's a magic emerald meteor from space in the 1940s.
It's the establishment of the JSA.
It's the birth of the Silver Age.
It's the introduction of a universal police force.
It's the formation of the JLA.
It's the emergence of the multiverse.
It's a crisis in both space and time.
It's an emerald dawn.
And it's an emerald twilight.
It's the brightest day.
And the blackest night.
And the Lantern cast covers all of this and everything in between. We're Green Lantern's greatest advocates and fiercest critics. We've been fans for years, and it's the reason we're self-proclaimed Lanternologists.
So find us on iTunes and Stitcher and give us a listen. Because the history of Green Lantern really is the history of the DC Universe. And we've got the interviews, commentaries, reviews, and more to back it up.
All right, guys, welcome back. We got some listener feedback, Myron, and I'm going to give it a shot here with the first one. Now, his comment says, I'm sure you're having trouble pronouncing my name, so you can call me Shiv in short. But I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb here and pronounce it as Shivaprasad Bhattacharya. Now, if he's listening, I want him to let me know if I pronounce that right, because I could get mad kudos if I did.
You will officially become the pronouncer of any email names that we get that I can't pronounce. It's all going to be you.
Truth be told, we have a pretty diverse student body at the school that I am an administrator at. So we have a lot of kids that are from the Middle East. We've got some kids from India. We got some kids from China. So anyway, so Shiv says, I'm from India, and I've been a big follower of your podcast and the Green Lanterns. I have a few questions for you. Number one, what are some interesting stories involving Alan Scott? I have read his appearance in GL and Flash, Brave and the Bold, but haven't gotten many. So which story arcs would you suggest? And number two, next year it is 80 years since first Green Lantern's appearance. Do you think there'll be some special publication like they did for 75 years? One last thing, really enjoy your work. Keep up the good work. All right, Shiv, thank you for all that. Now let's unpack this. Myron, what do you think? Now, you might need to help me with the Alan Scott thing.
I was hoping you were going to help me with the Alan Scott thing.
Man.
I'll be honest. My only really exposure to Alan Scott was when he did crossovers. Back in the day. When I was but a wee lad, there used to be an annual JSA JLA crossover, and that was my first exposure to Alan Scott. And then I saw the Alan Scott books where he would show up in Green Lantern. But that was really my main exposure. If I were going to recommend some Alan Scott stuff to people, because I haven't read the Golden Age stories, I kind of feel that if I recommended them, having not read them, I feel like that would be not a good thing, because I can't really recommend something I haven't read. But if you can find the JSA run that Jeff Johns did, his characterization of Alan Scott and all the Golden Age heroes, I thought was wonderful.
Yeah, I would have to second that. And what I would tell Shiv to do is, he could read Earth 2, but it's a different rendition of Alan Scott than what I think Shiv might be referring to, if you would agree. Yeah,
I would agree. I think he's talking about the traditional version of Alan Scott, not the Earth 2 reboot.
Gotcha. But it's a different take on him, so if you want to give it a shot, Shiv, it's pretty cool. It's a different take on Alan Scott, but his outfit's cool, and the story arc in Earth 2 is really, really neat.
And as far as the 80 years thing goes, I don't know what they're going to do. It's funny the way DC is. If it's 80 years for Batman, you can believe they're going to be doing a big thing about it.
Oh, yeah. They throw a parade in his friggin' honor. They'll probably have a parade down Fifth Avenue in New York or something like that.
so you're feeling the red, aren't you?
Oh, man. I mean, I'm not even a huge Batman fan, but he just gets all the kudos. Anyway, continue. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. That's all right. So I would be surprised, but I would be happily surprised. I'd love to see them do something for the 80th year, but I hope they do. I don't know if they will, but it would be nice.
Well, he deserves it. I mean, at the very least, I don't know. I mean, Green Lantern to me has been pushed to the back burner. I mean, keep in mind, Grant Morrison and Liam Sharp's run is doing awesome. But I mean, to me, with DC and where their route is going, it seems like Green Lantern has been pushed to the back burner, or it's on the periphery. You know what I mean? So they haven't really given it a lot of attention, and that could be a good and a bad thing. It could be good that it takes it out of the consciousness of the people and the fandoms, and then they're going to come back and surprise us with something. Or it could be a bad thing, and they just push it off to the side because sales with the character isn't very good. Who can tell? Who knows with DC at this point? You know. If I
were one to editorialize, and I am, I think that DC has done a horrible job of promoting the Green Lantern book. I think they did a good job when it first came out, but when I'm watching DC Daily on the DC Universe channel, and they show the new books of the week, I have yet to see them, except for in the very beginning when the Green Lantern first came out. They have not shown any of the issues.
Which is sad. Which is sad, because each one has gotten better and better and better as the story began.
Mm-hmm. But if it's a Brian Michael Bendis book, you can believe they're all over it, and they'll have Bendis on the show interviewing him.
You sounded like I sounded with Batman.
Well,
and I would agree with you on that one too. You're
right. So I don't know if DC knows what they're doing with the Green Lantern. And you know, we're seeing more and more Green Lanterns at this point, and we don't have any books to put them in, and we're creating new ones and not giving a home for the existing characters.
Well, not only that, but DC seems like they're going back and pulling out stuff from like Freedom Fighters, you know, with Venditti doing Freedom Fighters, which is a good book. But I mean, it's like they're reinventing all these old characters, and like the JSA might be coming back. You know, who knows if the JSA title is going to be coming soon? In
3 years, when Doomsday Clock is over with, they'll probably announce the JSA book.
Wait a minute, if Doomsday Clock is over with,
right. I think somebody needs to wind the Doomsday Clock because it's running a little slow. But Shib, thank you so much for your feedback. I appreciate it, and especially for you taking time out of your day to send comments and questions to us. It's great to hear from India, so thank you very, very much.
And let me know how I did on the pronouncement of your name.
Absolutely. So keeping with the international theme, we also have an email from Jay from New Zealand, and he says, "Good morning from New Zealand. Listening to your discussion on forced character legacies that don't go down well, I was thinking about how another aspect writers need to consider when introducing a major new character is longevity. Jeff Johns introduced Simon Baz when he only had 2 storylines, Rise of the Third Army and Wrath of the First Lantern, to go. And due to the scope of the latter, Simon got overshadowed by so many plot-twisting characters. The second half, after the change of creative teams, Simon was lucky to get panel time in an issue. Over in Batman around the same time, Scott Snyder was beginning to introduce a new member of the Bat family, Duke Thomas, a character who appeared sporadically and inconsistently. When Tom King took over the title for Rebirth, the first Rebirth issue made it look like Duke would have a big role, which ultimately didn't really happen. Duke only got more development with the Snyder-written Metal event. In short, don't just introduce a character so you can have a legacy in the title. Think about their role and their story potential. When Grant Morrison created Damian Wayne, he filled a niche that opened up so much for storytelling and shaking up character dynamics, not only for Bruce as a father, but his dynamic with Dick Grayson. Duke didn't have an apparent role in an already large Bat family, so writers didn't know how to use him properly. Now for a question. What storylines currently only available in floppies would you like to see in trade so more people can read them? Thank you, Jay. That very, very good commentary. I agree with you 100%. I think that's part of the problem with writers creating their own pet characters and throwing them out there without a long-term plan. I really do think that's an issue. And when you look at the Green Lantern thing, you know, people are saying, well, yeah, you know, Earth is such an important planet. That's why there's so many from Earth. But boy, when you saturated the market, we're up to, let's see, Hal, Guy, John, Kyle, Jessica, Simon, Teen Lantern, the new character that's going to be in Far Sector. I know I'm missing somebody. Who am I missing?
Well, there's that one that that's coming out in that young adult novel.
Right. And some of these, I realize some of these are maybe not in continuity, but at the same time, for a reader, if I have a young person and I pick up that book about the young boy who gets a Green Lantern ring from his grandmother, who was always a Green Lantern as well, I may be looking for more about that character, but when I go to the comic book store and go to buy a Green Lantern book, it's not going to be the character I'm interested in. And so I think that's where we create this divisive fandom. And when you've got so many characters, and some of them, like, Simon Baz has got a ring that can do stuff that nobody else can do, and Teen Lantern has a ring, she's hacked a power battery. Let me pick my feet up off the floor for that one. The Far Sector character has a ring that's different from everybody else's. Jessica Cruz has a ring that's different from everybody else's. Come on, guys.
Yeah, you're right. And yet they won't reintroduce a colored Spectrum Corps back to the Green Lantern, which Driven can get a lot of story content out of. I feel like, and I don't want to, I try not to be negative, honestly, but I feel like sometimes DC and the writers are like, well, hey, I'm going to create a new character and I don't know if it's going to stick, so let's graft it to one of the existing franchises and maybe that'll help the character stick around. And I think that's so creatively bankrupt. That's just a bad move. I mean, to me, it's just a bad move to do. Right. Because that's just creating a character just for the sake of creating a character. If he doesn't have a sole purpose, and like he said, Jay said in his commentary, have a purpose for that character that is going to be purposeful down the line. Right. And Simon Baz is a prime example of he obviously had a purpose at that time, but what is he now? I mean, he's not even around. I mean, we haven't even seen him. No, nobody knows where he is or if he is at this point. And, let's talk about Far Sector for just a moment. But I'm excited that DC is getting a writer like N.K. Jemisin to write a sci-fi Green Lantern book. But when you read the interviews with her, she didn't know anything about Green Lantern, so she's making something up. Which is never a good thing. No, and if it's another one of these things. Well, it's another. First of all, not only from Earth but from North America, like pretty much every other Lantern we've got, and who's a cop and gets a ring. But of course, this ring is unique from the normal ring, which allows the writer to ignore how Green Lantern rings work just to tell a story. And I'm just Well, and then like you said, it's a disconnect, right? I mean, then you got fans, the fandom like us, who talk about the Green Lantern Corps all day long and the Green Lanterns and so on and so forth. And then you got a character out there that's off the cusp that has nothing to do with the franchise. It's like, okay, where's she come from? How did she get that ring? We're Green Lantern fans. She can't just get a ring here. Right. We're the hardcore fans that pick apart at that. And if they can invest money, and this is where I come in to say my negativity, if they can invest money in creating a book called The Far Sector about a Green Lantern gets some ring, why can't they make a Green Lantern Corps book and put all these characters in there that there is a fandom out there that wants that? I don't know. Or why not tell that story with one of the existing members of the Corps that isn't even from Earth? Well, that's also true. I think this story would have been ripe for Sheriff Martin. Yeah, that would have been good. You're right. But what do I know? But anyway, but Jay, thank you for that. In terms of stories that are only available in floppies that I'd like to see in trade, I'd like to see some of the Mike W. Barr and Steve Englehart books collected. I don't know as if they have been really. A couple of them have been here and there, but by and large, that run is overlooked. It seems like when DC has done their collected editions, they always start back over again from the Silver Age and Showcase 22 and go forward. So, those books have been recollected over and over again. And then they kind of get up to the Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams books, and then they stop. And then another collection series will come out and they start all over again. So I think some of this newer stuff gets missed. And I think for the Kyle Rayner fans, I think it's a shame that I think they did one or two of those trades and then they stopped. Yeah, which is a shame because you're missing a large part of his story. Sure, and for those that want, to read them, you can probably still find those books. Just like you can find some of these other books. They're probably going to be cheaper than finding the Silver Age books, that's for sure. But
having them in trade and on your bookshelf, it makes it easier to read. I tend to buy the Green Lantern trades when they come out, because if I'm going to go back and reread, I don't want to go to my long boxes, unseal the books, read the floppies, and put them back in again. I'd rather just read it in a collected trade.
Yeah, it's easier and it's accessible, like you said.
Well, Jay, thank you so much. And again, for taking time out of your day to share your thoughts with us.
All right. Next up, we got, man, this must be Batman night here on the podcast. All right, here we go. We got Shadow of the Batman 1 via YouTube. One of the things I appreciate about this run so far is each issue could have been a 6-issue arc. Case in point, this issue alone could have been a 6-issue arc. Hold on. But Morrison is really good at trying something different. Nothing wrong with 6-issue arcs, but I'm glad that things are moving forward and quick. But we as the reader do have to slow down and dissect each panel and concentrate on wording. Nothing wrong with fun action space comics like Hal Jordan and GLC, but I'm glad that I feel rewarded when I pay attention to small details like that. Also, something I love is how written smart here and feels very experienced and grown up. And to me, it doesn't seem out of character. All right, Shadow of the Batman. First of all, thank you for your comment. Second of all, I agree with a lot of what he says. But I mean, the thing about Liam Sharp is like each panel. I mean, there's so much ingrained in each panel, and if I like having a lot of narrative in dialogue in panels. I don't know about you, Myron, but sometimes art can be overwhelming when you're trying to read what's happening in the panel itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think Liam Sharp does a good job of hashing that out to where it doesn't overcompass each other. And Grant Morrison he's wordy, and when he writes it. To me, it feels like he writes a long dialogue because. To me, he's constantly evolving the character traits. And I've seen that with Hal Jordan since Grant Morrison has started writing him. I still see the old Hal Jordan, but I still see new and developing Hal Jordan, if that makes sense. What do you think, Myron?
I agree. And one of the things that Shadow of Batman says that I really do agree with 100% is he says, case in point, this issue alone could have been a 6-issue arc. And one of the things that I think comic book fans have gotten tired about, and I hear a lot of people commenting about, is this decompressed storytelling to make it fit in a trade, so that, a 3-issue story that could have been condensed down to 2 or even 1 issue is stretched out for the sake of making it fit. And Grant Morrison does such a great job of compressing the story. It doesn't feel rushed, but it feels meaty. You feel like you're getting more than a book when you buy the book. None of these are quick 20-minute, 15-minute, 10-minute read-throughs.
No, not at all. Because I know a lot of times I've gotten in the habit of sitting down with each Green Lantern book and devoting my time to it without being distracted, because I want to make sure I pay attention to how Grant Morrison is writing him. So I pay attention to a lot of what words he uses and what kind of phrasing he uses for the characters. And a lot of times in other comics, you don't get a lot of that, because it's usually like just a couple sentences, sentence here and there, move on to the next panel, maybe not even anything, and then you move on to the next panel. There might be nothing much there, no narrative. But I like Grant Morrison's dialogues. I like his writing, and I like you said, it's meaty. So I feel like I'm getting a lot of what the writer is putting into it.
Yeah, I find it's not a book that you just flip through.
No, definitely not.
So again, thank you for your comment. And we have another one. This is also via YouTube. This comes from Marco8081. And he says, aloha from Hawaii. I listen to you guys religiously. I'm a huge Garth Ennis fan. He writes war stories like no other. I think that putting Guy Gardner and or the Corps in the DC's Black Label would be great. Writers like Ennis can explore the dark side of the Green Lantern Corps with all the bad that comes with the war. It's not always pretty. I'm a huge Stewart and Gardner fanboy. Aloha. And Marco, I think you are 100% right. I think
that's spot on. I didn't even think about that. That's actually a really good idea.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant idea. Garth Ennis doing war stories with the Green Lantern Corps with Guy Gardner, and I'd love to see a Guy Gardner Kyle Rayner team up with a squad.
That would be cool. Those two always butted heads, but it was really, really kind of humorous,
Yeah, I thought they got along well, and it's a dynamic that kind of is missing, and it gives them both something to do. And to do a war story where maybe they're in a squad, are sent off to deal with a conflict, and it's this protracted conflict, could be very, very interesting.
Side note question: are they still doing Black Label? Because I'm not sure they got in some heat with that last one with Batman, didn't they?
Yeah. I'm not sure if they're still calling it Black Label, or if they're doing something different. To be honest, I haven't been following it, so I wouldn't.
Well, I know they're doing that Deceased that's coming out. You've seen that, right?
Yeah, Deceased.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Man, we're getting listeners from all over. This is kind of cool. All right, so the next one is from Santiago Martin Marone. All right, so this is his reaction. It looks like his reaction to the Far Sector.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Santiago says, I think they could have used some of existing, well, like you said, existing lanterns, even someone of not Earth ones. We have thousands of lanterns of which we could have stories. Greetings for everyone. Yeah, you said the same thing. I mean, you could have easily taken any number of lanterns that are in the core and put them in the Far Sector, and it would have been just as relevant.
Right. And I think it would have been interesting for it to have been an alien. Sheriff Martin would be, like I said, would be a great character for that kind of a story. Or you could have done something like Mosaic with Jon Stewart and done something similar with John. Or I know he's in Justice League, but
I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that a Far Sector title like that would have been cool for Kyle Rayner.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'd agree with that.
I mean, it's just, Kyle Rayner's, he's held every ring there is, obviously, and he's been around, and for some reason, writers never know what they're going to do with him. Now that Titans is ending, who knows where he's going to end up at that point? But this would have been a good jumping on point for him to go to the Far Sector. He could have just went on his own personal journey to whatever and ended up in this place, and he still had his ring, and then he could have been the Far Sector Lantern, and then I don't know. That's just my thought. Kyle Rayner fans, I hope you like it.
Yeah, I again, I don't want to get on a soapbox, but I think that the Green Lantern Corps mythology is the most diverse mythology out there. I think it's the most diverse franchise in comics because you've got all of these aliens with such great stories, and each one of them is relatable in some way. And boy, I'd love it if we could get to the point where people could relate to characters based on the fact of what's underneath their skin and what's in their heart and souls, and not worry about whether they look like me, do they believe like me, do they have preferences like me? I don't know. I grew up relating.
The petty indifferences need to end.
Yes, and it kills me in that people keep trying to preach that stuff, but at the same time, you get this kind of thing where the character's got to be this or that to be relatable or marketable or to show diversity. I have a son, and I raised my son to look for the commonality in people beyond what we see with our eyes. And so, he can relate to a Wonder Woman character, even though he's not a woman or an Amazon. He can relate to Batman, even though his parents aren't dead and killed by someone. He can relate to Superman, even though he's an alien from a dying planet. He doesn't need to have somebody who looks like him, who is the same gender as him, right. Any of that stuff to relate, and to think that we have to create characters to fit, like, so that they look like somebody, so that person can relate to them. How stupid are people being treated?
Well, yeah, and I brought up a point on Twitter the other day about. So somebody was talking about Jessica Cruz or something like that, and I commented back that at least the writers that use Jessica Cruz for what they used her for exploited an aspect of human frailty that went beyond gender and went beyond ethnicity. They actually focus on a mental situation. Something that is an actual mental condition that people do have, and instead of the petty indifferences that people can't see behind because somebody's black, white, whatever the color of their skin, or because they come from another country. And like with you, I'm on board with you. People need to start getting over that. I think we've come to a time where, we're past all that crap now, people. Let's move on.
I wish we were past all that, but I look at the head papers every day and look at social media, and we're not. We're not. It's funny, if you go back to the 1960s, what was the most popular character on Star Trek?
Oh, it would have been Uhura.
No, it was Mr. Spock.
Oh, Mr. Spock.
Who's an alien, you know. Who was the most popular
You're right.
Who was the most popular character in Star Trek The Next Generation?
Data, wasn't it?
Yeah, an android. So
Funny how that works.
we don't need characters who look like us and who have the same color skin than us to be relatable, and we should be able to look past that. I don't need to have somebody, nobody looks like me. Sure, they may have the same melanin deficiency that I have, but they don't have all the same life experiences I do. They don't have any of those other things like me. The only thing they may have in common with me is the color of the skin. That's about it. And I don't care about any of that. I want characters that are interesting, and you can find inspiration from any good comic character, any good well-written character you can find inspiration from.
I completely agree. And I completely agree with Santiago. I think they could have used another character in that far sector, and I think it would have been more relevant. But hey, that's why I'm Phil Bova sitting in St. Louis, Missouri.
And that's why I'm a middle-aged comic book fan sitting in my house recording a podcast at 10 o'clock at night.
Exactly right. Here we are.
Well, everybody, thank you for all the feedback and comments and bearing with us as Phil and I get on our soapbox a little bit. We do appreciate all of your comments and take them all to heart. And I'm so happy that folks are making this show a part of their Green Lantern fan experience, and I hope that it adds value to them and to what they get and enjoy out of the books and so on. And I just appreciate people taking time out of their day to let us know what they think.
And seconded, and I think it's super cool that people were writing in from New Zealand and Shibs from India and from Hawaii and stuff. It's just this, like you said, man, it's just flattering that these people from all over the world are writing in and responding, and they're listening, and they're out there. And what's up? We love all you guys. We're glad you're listening. Shib, I hope I said your name right. Again, please write in and let me know, or let Myron know. And we hope to hear from you guys more often.
All right. Well, we'll be right back to close the show.
This is Giancarlo Volpe, producer of Green Lantern, the animated series, and you're listening to the podcast of OA.
All right, Myron, listeners, welcome back. Here we are, episode 138, right?
Yep, 138.
In the bank. The start of JLMAY, the start of the big Blackest Night event. I can't express this enough, readers. Go out and pick it up and read all of them. It is an excellent story.
Yeah, I agree. And again, to reiterate, this is part of a multi-podcast crossover event. So when you're done listening to our show, be paying attention to Chris and Reggie's Cosmic Treadmill. I'll have a link in the show notes, or look it up online. They have a website. You can go and find them. Look for their episode where they're going to cover Blackest Night #1, and then be on the lookout for everybody else who's part of this podcast crossover event. I hope that it provides information and enjoyment to everybody. I think, I have to give big kudos to Chad Bokelman and Mark Marble over at the Lantern Cast, because they put all this together. It's their hard work.
And it's really going to be cool because, all these listeners are going to get different perspectives and different feedback from different people and different podcasts. And it may not be in line with their way of thinking, but and not a lot of people may agree with a lot of the points that they make, but I'll tell you what, it's a different perspective. So this is why it encourages you guys to go out there and read it yourself to get your own perspective for it, because you'll be amazed by it. It's a great story arc.
Absolutely. And it also is a nice way to showcase how great the comic book podcast community is. Because when you look at all these shows, just like our show, we don't get paid for this. It actually costs us money to do a podcast, and not to mention the time it takes for Phil and I to record and edit. And these guys are all doing the exact same thing. They're doing this because they love the medium. They love the characters they're doing their show about, or they're doing them about comics in general. And it's a labor of love for all of us. We all love the medium. So it's neat to be able to interact with other people and hear their perspectives on what they talk about. And I'm looking forward to listening to what they have to say, and I'm going to be reading along with the books they're covering to see what did I miss, because as much as I think I'm a very attentive reader, I know I can miss things, and so I'm really interested in seeing what they got out of it and what their observations are to compare and contrast them to my own.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.
All right, well, Brother Phil, this wraps up another one. So we'll be back in just a couple weeks because we'll have the Green Lantern #7 to be talking about.
Yeah, and Liam Sharp, I don't know if you guys have checked that out. Liam Sharp's been teasing some of the prints from it, so it looks pretty awesome.
Yeah, boy, if there's somebody I would like to go to a convention and see, I think it's Liam Sharp.
I want to what I would like to do myself is to embed my mind behind that man's eyes because I want to see what he sees when he draws. So I had to get existential there for a minute, but and that guy's got a golden pencil, man. I'll tell you.
Yeah, I gotta agree. So we'll be back in a couple weeks. I hope you've enjoyed this installment. I hope if you're a new listener, you come back and join us again in a couple weeks when we talk about Green Lantern again. Until next time, everybody treat each other well. Make every day your brightest day.
All right, we'll see you guys later.
The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.